I'd always believed that Advent was about preparing for what lies ahead, pausing in winter darkness to welcome the light. I loved sitting in the unknown and wondering what mysteries God might hold for me in this season. I had always looked forward to the light of the Christ child breaking in to the darkness of the night. But when we started trying to have a child and Advent came around, the season of waiting took on a different tone. The hopeful anticipation was marked with longing after months of negative tests, and the waiting took on a weightier meaning still when there was no certainty and so much unknown. In the grand scheme of things, my own season of waiting was relatively short, but in that year and a half, I learned something about waiting and accompanying. Families and folks struggling with infertility, miscarriage, and infant loss during Advent, an entire season dedicated to the hopeful anticipation of a long-awaited birth. The season only highlights the aching that they live with every day. But in their journey, they learn something, in the painful and plodding way that learning often takes, about what preparation and patience and persistence really mean. These are the stories of 3 women who have shared what they have learned with the wider family of faith about moving through Advent and Christmas, accompanied by the grief and longing unique to infertility, that even in the midst of pain, the journey can still be good and meaningful. Katie Waldo and her husband Stephen live in Ocean City, New Jersey, where Katie is a youth leader and blogger. Through her blog, Katie invited folks into her struggle with infertility. Katie and her husband Stephen had wanted a honeymoon baby. They joked about it at first, and then their joking turned into imagining, turned into excitement, and turned into planning how they would share their news when the time came, sure that it wouldn't be long. Today, Katie writes, we are 3 years and 6 months from that very first moment of possibility. We've watched days stretch into weeks, hanging on to every symptom, saying, this will be the month, with a confidence that only the ignorantly blissful possess. We had named our daughter, we named our son, we talked about them like we knew them personally, the little souls who had yet to arrive. Katie says that she and Stephen prayed and prayed. A few months into their marriage, Katie learned that she was not ovulating at all. It was something that she had expected, since she had been dealing with symptoms for some time. As Katie and Stephen approached Advent in that first year of their marriage, they began fertility treatment. As they began treatment, Katie says that she was filled with the same hopeful, expectant waiting that parallels the beating heart of the church as the church waits for the birth of Christ. It was easy for Katie to embrace the spirit of Advent and Christmas that very first year. But as the months passed without a positive test, she found herself increasingly discouraged in the heart of a physical and spiritual winter. So much of her time, energy, money, and spiritual life had been poured into trying to conceive that first year. Katie says she began to harbor resentment toward God for not rewarding her with what she desired. Katie's prayers turned from patient pleading to an anxious tallying of readiness, as if she was owed something in return for her good behavior. Katie says she asked the Lord, don't you see that I am open to new life? Do you see that I am ready? I can be selfless. I want a child. I deserve a child. She says she felt abandoned by God for the first time in her life. The cross of infertility was not one that she felt willing to bear. And as the year turned a corner and they approached Advent again, Katie was hesitant. Katie had spent so long trying to avoid the reality of her infertility, She didn't want to admit the struggle that she had encountered trying to fall pregnant because she was afraid to appear like less of a woman, broken, infertile. When Katie finally stopped being afraid of the word infertile and all of its implications, she found a freedom to move forward and a better understanding of Advent. Katie writes that calling out the lies tied to her worth, recognizing the gifts and blessings that God had given her, and using those gifts to serve others, helped unite her deeper with Mary's journey. Katie says she no longer felt disconnected from that beautiful moment when Mary says, "Let it be done to me according to your word," because she understood what it meant to be open to God working in her own life, even if the outcome wasn't what she had expected. Leah is a Lutheran professor of religious studies and a pastor's spouse who shares her personal reflection on her struggle with infertility with Christianity today. Leah writes, "Last Advent season, I was, in medical terms, a woman of advanced maternal age. If you think that's insensitive," she says, "the official category used to be geriatric pregnancy. As the scriptures say, I was expecting a child in my old age. After spending almost a decade praying, pleading, bargaining, and weeping for a child, my perspective changed on what counts as miraculous." Like many couples who struggle with infertility, Leah writes, "When my spouse and I began our quest to welcome a child into our family, we had every confidence that we would achieve our goal in a matter of months. But after 7 years of ovulation kits, basal body temperature thermometers, medical interventions, hormonal treatments, and pregnancy loss, we found ourselves emotionally, financially, and spiritually exhausted." Many women struggling to bear children will attest to the fact that when you are trying to have a baby, it seems like everyone you know is pregnant. Leah writes in particularly obnoxious and accidental ways. "Oops, your friend's Instagram account will say, 'My partner and I weren't even trying, but now we're having twins.'" Leah says she diligently tried to talk herself out of grief. She told herself that the social and cultural directives put upon women unfairly prioritized biological motherhood as the most valuable form of existence. Leah says that as a pastor's wife, she was under an unusual amount of pressure to produce a nuclear family, something that Protestants have valued since the days of Martin Luther. And she told herself that as a woman of considerable privilege, with a network of loving friends and family, she had no right to be full of sadness when so many others in the world suffered more than she did. Of course, there is truth in all of these things, but they're cold comfort in a season of sorrow. Leah tells the story of one Christmas Eve after a particularly grueling and unsuccessful round of hormone treatments, when she was asked to read the Magnificat from the pulpit. The grandmother who was scheduled to read it had laryngitis, so as the pastor's spouse, Leah was around and available. As she stood in the pulpit and recited the words stoically, "Surely from now on all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me," Leah says, that evening she was angry with everyone and everything around her, even the Blessed Virgin herself. Mercifully, Leah says, this season came to an end. On their very last try with medical technology, Leah and her spouse welcomed a baby into their household. That pregnancy was fraught with terror. Every waking hour brought with it new fears that she would lose the baby growing inside of her. The second time around for Leah, she was the one who was pregnant by surprise, and in her old age. Those who know what it's like to endure the pain of infertility and pregnancy loss know the weird feeling of survivor's guilt that accompany this type of family building. Leah says, "Oh, my friend, I have been there. I can close my eyes and be standing in the cold bathroom at the specialist's office, or kneeling on the little bath mat in her bathroom at home, or in her bed wide-eyed and awake. All of the places where so many questions cycled through my head," she says, over and over. We can feel like we're on the proverbial hamster wheel, constantly moving, exhausted, but feeling like nothing is happening. But just like in Advent, Leah says, something is happening. God is at work. Whether we can see it or feel it, God is moving. Elizabeth didn't have a blog or a pulpit to share her story from. Heck, she doesn't even get to write her own words. They are all filtered through the disciples and their students in the Gospels. And while Elizabeth wouldn't have known that she was participating in the first Advent, her experience did make it into scriptures. And if she were able to share her perspective with us, I imagine it would be something like this. Maybe a virgin conceiving by divine order tops everyone else's pregnancy story. But I know the quieter and commoner glory of feeling the company of a child after decades of solitude. I think of those women who came before me in faith: Sarah and Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah, the unnamed mother of Samson, the wife of Manoah. All of these women struggled for years to conceive and ultimately received the blessing of a child. I remember the first time I felt my baby leap in my womb. My cousin Mary had come to stay with me and shared that she was pregnant as well. The power of that moment had moved me. I had longed for it, waited for it for years. Mary had an angel visit her. She had an outline. She knew exactly when all of this would happen for her. But I lived in a season of waiting without knowing when or if that season would ever end. I had no promises and no guarantees. At first, it was disappointment with a loud and joyful hope, and then a pained longing, accompanied by a cacophony of questions. How can I redeem myself so that I'm worthy of bearing a child? What will happen? Why did we lose this baby? Why can't they tell me what's wrong? Why do I still feel just as hopeless as I did last year? Are we just going in circles? When will we grow our family? Will we ever grow our family? Until, at last, the questions were answered and the waiting turned into arrival. Katie and Leah and the imagined voice of Elizabeth are only the stories of 3 women, but they are joined by a chorus of women and would-be parents throughout time, struggling with infertility, living in the shadow of miscarriage and infant loss, and living in the unknown season of waiting for adoption placements. This season of Advent is about waiting, but really it is also about the end, about the prize, about the great hope fulfilled. Other people's Christmas brings a child in the manger, but for some people the waiting does not simply end because Christmas comes around. That expectant feeling is all too familiar, a longing that grows stronger but is never fulfilled, a seemingly endless attempt to arrive at Christmas morning. It's hard to see the glow of the manger scene while experiencing such a barren reality, to be ready with a yes, but to have arms that remain empty. When your deepest longing is for a child of your own, the constant reminders of your missing miracle can be too much to bear. And There is so much hope in the spark of new life. When Jesus was born, he wasn't in keeping with the vision of the Messiah that people had. They expected someone else, a different sort of king. This babe in swaddling clothes was not what they had in mind, but it was hope fulfilled. And still, there will be times when, after all the waiting and preparation, we will find that the blessing we receive is not necessarily the one we had hoped for, expected, or even imagined. We remember in these moments, as the Psalms remind us, the Lord will not forget to bless us. All who worship the Lord, no matter who they are, will receive God's blessing. And so in this season of Advent, we look for God's blessing in the midst of our waiting, in the midst of our anticipation, and even our grief and longing. We look for blessings as we care for children in the family of faith, offering our love and presence as generations before did for us. We look for and offer blessing as we come alongside members of our community in their disappointment and grief, and hopefully bear witness to their grief transformed. And if we ourselves are the ones struggling this Advent season, we can offer blessings and receive them as we tell our stories, so that those struggling in silence know they are never alone. We can prepare ourselves and the church together for the next new thing that God is doing, though none of us know quite what that looks like, though none of us can even imagine, even as we hope beyond hope for new life, renewed life, and to come closer and closer still to God's presence, as God draws nearer still to us. Amen.